We are continuing our pro-life apologetics series, and today I just was going to go through what I would consider the 21 most common objections I hear from pro-choice people, and I just wanted to give you guys proper ways to argue them. Okay, so we already did the SLED test. We talked about personhood. We went through a lot of statistical claims and technical things there, and then we showed how actually the data doesn't line up using actually liberal, if we can use that term, data sources and things along that nature. So today we're going to just go ahead and go over how to respond to these arguments. This basically should be kind of a roadmap a little bit on how you can have this conversation with people. Now, granted, it's a hard conversation to have, and like I've said before, it really depends. Adjust your tone depending on who you're talking to, right? I think I have emphasized that a lot. Just want to make sure we're careful of that. You know, if you're dealing with a young lady who's has a really hard situation, maybe don't pull out the sledgehammer, okay? But if you are dealing with somebody who is just being vindictive, I think it's okay to pull out the bulldozer and have a good time. Because the thing is, believe it or not, you can convince people even with intense argumentation, and people don't think that's a thing. But I know I personally have seen somebody convert and repent of their sin by having those conversations, because this person was very combative, so I responded combatively, and the arguments still pull weight because truth is truth. So if the person is actually open to truth but just passionate and believe in a lie, you can convince them otherwise. Sometimes if you're too nice, you're not going to be very effective. Sometimes if you're too mean, you're not going to be very effective. So adjust course accordingly, okay? So, all right. Now, a couple of things. Now, this is a lot of it. There's a few things I want to make sure I mention with this whole banning of Roe v. Wade. A lot of people are now, you're hearing the hype, right, of now we can't get abortions. That is actually emphatically untrue. There's plenty of, actually there was only, I think, was it 13 states that had like trigger laws. Yeah, 13 states have trigger laws that would ban abortion, and as many as 23 states would have abortion banned, but not even half. So they're still available today. And also another common thing I'm hearing more and more is that, well, now that they're going after abortion this hard, they're going to go after things like gay marriage, how you raise your kid, things like that, or ban contraception even. No, honey, no. I know. Yes, good job. All right, so, yep, Micah's keys, super cool. All right, so the thing is with that being said, I think whenever this happens, have you guys seen this right now? Like, oh, they're going to have to go gay marriage, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. I think, honestly, you can say that, one, the opinion obviously is dealing with the Roe v. Wade and the Planned Parenthood, the PP versus Casey case. But if you need to shift the topic, and this is why I would just tell them, if you need to shift the topic to these other areas, you probably don't have a good argument, right? So, all right. So with that being said, Micah? Cool. All right. I don't know where Callie's at. I was trying to find her and I couldn't find her, so I don't know where she's at. So my child, it's okay. My child will just wander around in here. I'm fine with it. Okay. It's okay, Tiffany. You're good. You can stay. As long as you guys are okay with it, but I find children to be a blessing, so I don't know. For me, it's one of those things where it's like if a kid cries in church, I'm not that person who's like, shut that kid up. I'm like, oh, well, there's kids in this church. That's actually a good thing. And let parents parent. So, all right. Now let's just go ahead and start going through some of these objections. And I just literally have the objection up here, then I'm going to walk you through it logically and go for the, hey, I found Callie. Andrew. Yes. All right. So the first objection that we're going to talk about is, you'll hear this one, it's a woman's right to choose. It's a woman's right to choose. So there are at least, I think whenever this happens, you need to start emphasizing that there are two lives to be discussed here. So you must first, again, that personhood discussion should come up. Hey, this is how do you define a person? What is a person? Okay, great. If that's the case, there's two lives in the balance, both mother and child. And a person having the right to end another's life is the same logic as slavery, dictatorships, and things along that nature, right? Because I have the right to choose my slaves because I'm the property owner. Well, if you're the property owner of your body and therefore whatever is on your body is your property, well, therefore, that's a very similar argument to slavery. Does that make sense? So you can actually go that direction with it. So also, where does this idea of a right even come from? These are some great arguments for you to go, okay, what is a right? Define a right, and where do rights come from? Right? Because if you have our Constitution says these inalienable rights from our Creator, well, then you can make a moral argument from God's existence. Or is a woman, and so this is the other thing to bring up, what's a woman's right to choose? Okay, great, but is a woman not responsible for her own choices, right? So is a woman not responsible for her own choices? Can a man kill his wife if he regrets marrying her? No. And every man said drat. No, I'm just kidding, just kidding. This is going online. I should probably be more careful. All right, so there are many choices, and this is the other thing. You're right, it is a woman's right to choose. But there's a lot of other choices, right? There's the choice of abstinence, choice of birth control, adoption, and parenthood. These are choices. So to say that we're anti-choice is completely a misnomer. We're pro-choice. We're just pro any choice not killing child. Okay? That's the thing. So if you run as a woman's right to choose, I would always tell you to make sure you emphasize that there is two lives hanging in the balance. Where did the idea of a right even come from? And is someone not supposed to be responsible for their own choices? Okay? Those are things that you need to be emphasizing. So, and a great thing here is adoption is a great option. I don't know if you know this, because what I hear all the time is when you bring up adoption, they're like, well, if they go in the adoption system, we don't know where they're going to land as a baby. You don't know if they're even going to be adopted in the first place. They could just be raised in this horrible foster system. Babies have a huge waiting list of over 30 people, last I checked, waiting to adopt babies. So if you have a baby and you want to put it up for adoption, the chances of it being adopted into a family is very high. And of course, here's my other thing though. If you are concerned about putting your child up for adoption and it possibly running into a home that you wouldn't like, then perhaps that is a good indication you should raise your own child. Right? So these are things that you want to make sure you are pushing and make sure you're pressing. And remember the SLED test, and remember all the ways to, how do you define personhood? How do you define personhood? Okay, so if a woman's right, so if that is a person, and we can draw a line and discuss what a person is, then you know that one can't kill somebody because they've inconvenienced them, because they regret it, things along that nature. Okay, those are things to keep in mind. So the other thing is, it's a healthcare or a woman's health. It's a healthcare woman's right to choose. You'll hear that as well, or reproductive health, right? So if it's a reproductive health thing, a couple ways to respond to this. If you hear this, well, it's healthcare. So abortion, I think you should instantly point out, is the exact opposite of healthcare. It's the exact opposite of healthcare because it ends a life, not saves one, right? At least in the vast majority of cases, besides something like an ectopic pregnancy. In fact, it is also very detrimental to women. The women I have talked to who have had abortions are very traumatized still. They have a lot of baggage still with that. They're still processing that. I was talking to a counselor last night. He's dealing with a case where a young lady is deeply traumatized because she had one and she thought it was, the wise choice because she has so many health issues and her situation is very tough. So it is one of those things where it's the opposite of healthcare though, because so many women afterwards are hurt, broken, and destroyed afterwards. So it is important that you emphasize that. The British Journal, I've already told you guys, has done a study, a spike, a 35% increase of anxiety, depression, and suicidal rates. And there's another study that showed after a year anniversary from the abortion, there was actually a suicide spike. So it's not healthcare. It's the exact opposite. Tiffany.
There's also some studies done that it can lead to breast cancer because your body is starting to develop, getting ready for the baby, and then when it stops like that they may have some issues in the breast.
That actually, I did not know that, but it actually makes sense that would happen because you just unnaturally cut off the bottle, and now your body's like, what do I do with this? And it can cause complications. It makes sense too because there's also infertility problems. That's some people who have abortions, which again, not healthcare, right? So I think that's a great way to kind of punch that in the teeth a little bit, that objection. If it's reproductive health, what exactly is the woman reproducing? That's another great question to ask them. Oh, so it's not a person. Okay. Then what is she reproducing if we're discussing reproductive health? It's a great question to ask, and it's funny, if you do ask them that, it does stop them in their tracks for a second. You get them going, well, it's not a person yet. Well, okay, cool. Then you ask them, when is it a person? Actually, if you ever pull up a baby, one of those charts, like a developmental chart, one of my favorite things to do is pull that chart up and go, okay, so great. When is it a person? Here or here? Or why there and not there? Is that not the same being? So those are the things that you can do. There's a great, if you, whether you like Steven Crowder or not, he does these great Change My Mind segments, and he has this, if you look it up on YouTube, just, I'm pro-life, change my mind, and he has a whole, 2.5-hour conversation with a lady, and he does all these little tactics, but he's very polite, and gets her afterwards like, I didn't think about all this. Because a lot of people haven't. A lot of people have not been thinking about it, right? So another way to respond to this, if this were opposite and 1 million mothers died a year from pregnancy, would we call it removing healthcare if people tried to reduce those deaths substantially? So just reverse the situation, right? Go, okay, cool. Well, we have about 1 million babies that are aborted every year. How many, if we had 1 million mothers that died from pregnancy every year, would you say that we're removing healthcare by trying to remove that problem? Well, no, of course you wouldn't, right? So studies show again that women who have had abortions are actually 6 times more likely to have suicidal tendencies, much more likely to have also abuse of drugs and alcohol. So again, not healthcare, okay? So then another objection, it's just a clump of cells. This one actually will almost every single time make me cringe. Ben Shapiro is probably the best response to it that you can just say off the cuff. Well, you're also just technically a clump of cells. We're all technically a clump of cells. What does that even mean, right? And actually, biologists have been pushing against that because, no, it is not just a clump of cells. Clump of cells are benign; they don't really do anything. These are developing, they're growing. If you leave it alone to its natural processes, it is born. It grows legs. It is not just a clump of cells. This is an active biological thing that's taking place here. One might say life. Anyway. And that's the other, and then another thing is what other people like to bring up. Okay, cool. If we found a single, with all this talk of going to Mars and the space programs and all that, if we found a single cell on Mars, we would say we found life on Mars, right? We found life on Mars. This is amazing. Well, here now we have multiple cells with human DNA, its own unique DNA, growing within a mother at a natural biological process, and we say that's not life. You see, the logical contradiction is maddening when you see it. You can't unsee it. There's a reason why a lot of people who actually have been pro-choice but have actually researched this eventually go, oh, I was wrong. Happened to my buddy Brian. In fact, if he wasn't teaching, it wasn't elder at another church, I'd have him come here and tell his story about him and his wife and their son who was born at 25 weeks. So maybe I could set that up at some point. But all right. So it's not a clump of cells. This argument was mostly abandoned, by the way, by actual pro-choice people decades ago. The only people who still use this are just talking heads. Okay. So actual pro-choice talking, people who are in the leaders, they've actually abandoned this, and they're telling people it's not a good scientific argument, stop using it, but people still do it because it's a catchy bumper sticker, okay? We are all technically, like I said, a couple cells. The ruling from the court will just be, that's another, if you want to get snarky, the ruling of the court to overthrow Roe v. Wade is technically just a clump of words, so. Depends how cheeky you want to get, but you can actually just kind of show how silly this gets. So, and again, at conception, 2 gametes from sperm from the male and egg from the female combine and become a zygote, a fertilized egg with chromosomes from both gametes. Cell division immediately takes place within a matter of days and weeks forms a fully developed human being. Now, sometimes you'll say that, fully developed human being. See, so it wasn't a human being before. You just admitted it. No, fully developed. Because again, we argue the fact that the level of development does not dictate personhood. You can be as very little developed to highly developed. It doesn't matter. You're still a person, right? So make sure you emphasize that. and only, and this is the other thing to point out, if it's just a clump of cells, well, only living things grow, right? Only living things grow. So it's a unique human DNA. It's not just a dormant clump of cells. So whenever you hear this, that is one of those easy ones that it should allow you to be able to go in there precisely and snipe that, okay? And deal with that, especially if you're dealing with people who are struggling with that. Another objection you hear is, well, the baby isn't sentient, right? It's not sentient. It doesn't know. It does. The baby has no idea. So, however, let's define sentience. Sentience is able to experience feelings, responsive to or conscious of sense impressions, and capable of feeling things through physical senses. That's sentience. Okay? So, now here's the obvious way to respond if that's what sentience means. Depending on your definition and stage of development, the fetus is sentient for one, right? Of course, when it's just fertilized egg, it's not going to move away from the instruments, right? It doesn't have a developed nervous system yet. However, it's still the same DNA as it. But, most of the time when abortions are taking place, the child is actually trying to move away from abortion instruments. So there is sentience there by definition. So, also, does the logic hold for every age? So sentience is what meant, okay, can I kill you when you're asleep or in a coma? Great question to ask, because when you're in a coma, are you able to experience feelings responsive to or conscious or sense impressions and capable of feeling things through physical senses? No, you're in a coma, right? So does that mean when you're in a coma, I just get to walk up to you with a knife, but plant it in your chest and go, well, it wasn't a person? You see, we're on dicey territory when we make sentience the level by which we measure personhood. So we see babies respond to pain in the womb, even avoiding the suction tube in an abortion. They can feel things. You can see it on ultrasounds, babies trying to get comfortable in the womb. Or another thing is my dad always tells me the story that apparently I had a tendency to push with my elbows out of my mom, and then he would just go put his finger around it like that, and then I'd bloop right back in. And he's like, that was hilarious. He just did it bloop, right back in. Well, that's because apparently in the womb I went, yikes, something just touched me. What was that? So that's kind of the idea. So they can feel things. There is sentience there. And again, sentience does not dictate personhood or whether something is moral. Since when is someone's personhood dictated by their cognizance or their sensory organs? That's not personhood, right? So, the other objection you'll hear is that the baby violates the mother's bodily autonomy. How many of you heard this one? And they'll say something to the effect of it's like a parasite, things like that. Which, first off, I don't know if I had the parasite in this. I should have added it. The way to respond to parasite is very easy. Okay, an unborn child simply does not fit the definition of a parasite. Parasite is an external species that latches onto a host for survivability, and that's part of its entire life cycle. That's at a mature stage, it even is a parasite, okay? It is a different species it is not a biological process through reproduction that is actually usually most people understand what's going to happen, or at least the risk thereof when they partake in sexual relations, right? So, it's not like, you went there and this happened and oops, so now I have a parasite. So, it's not how that works. Also, in 99% of pregnancies resulting in abortions, the mother freely engaged in an activity that has a chance of creating a life. Remember, statistically, 98 to 99% of women, they knew if I engage in this activity, pregnancy might take place, right? It's very different. So this is a willful agreement to give up some bodily autonomy. The act of sex does this inherently, right? There is another person engaging with you. I don't want to be graphic in here, but it is what it is. There is a part of me giving myself over to you. Why do you think the Bible says even that the two shall become one flesh? Is very much this idea, you two together. There's a bit of that going on. If you invite someone over to your house, but not sure if they will come over, but then they just decide to show up, the question is, can you kill them? If you decide later on you wanted them to leave. Well, no. I mean, that's a great way to do if you want to have a good discussion with somebody. sometimes you have to go, all right, okay, cool. So we're discussing this, and they're having a hard time seeing it outside of that. Pull it away and apply it to something else over here. And then they can see sometimes where the logic, oh, I didn't see, because sometimes you get so wrapped up in this conversation that you're not seeing where the logic is tripping up. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So since the baby also is scientifically its own human body, DNA, blood type, genitalia, the whole 9 yards, then to terminate it is also to violate its autonomy. So again, it's not your bodily autonomy, it's not the baby's bodily autonomy, it's both bodies are there in one person, right? So it's important to emphasize that. Do not dehumanize one for the sake of the other. So also, you can 100% avoid losing this bodily autonomy. You can, 100%, by not having sex. Right? Now, I know it's not as fun, right? Because I'm a Christian, and the Bible talks about it enough. Song of Solomon makes very clear. Sex is a wonderful thing, and it's a lot of fun. However, you can avoid it. You avoid babies by not engaging, right? So the reaction, like something like after the Texas bill that was passed, was telling women to stop having sex until the law was overturned. Did you guys see all that, the pro-choice people? They're like, well, no, we don't have rights to abortion. We don't have access to it. Women, stop having sex. Don't hook up with men. Stop having sex. And it was kind of funny because now they're preaching what we've been preaching. Until men give us our rights back, we won't have sex with them. And I was like, very nice. Okay, that's kind of what we've been saying. So the irony strikes, you know what I'm saying? But also, that screamed to me that people clearly understand the scientific fact of what they're engaging in, what it can do, and that they're using it for birth control. Make sense? Mm-hmm. You guys see what I'm saying here? But it is funny because they, somebody was like, well, you used the wrong formula, but you got to the right conclusion. And I just thought that was funny. Now, there's another thing to make sure I mention here. Micah kept telling me to make sure I bring it up. So I will bring it up. I'm going to walk away from the audio. Sorry, audio. How many of you guys have ever heard the pro-choice argument known? Oh. All right. That doesn't. Okay. I'll pick those up later. I will. Or I'll make you pick it up, Micah.
Oh, I know.
Have you guys ever heard of the violinist argument? No. I'm sure you're all wondering, what does a violinist have anything to do with the abortion discussion? And that's a good question, because I had the same, as a violinist myself, I want to know why they're bringing me into this, right? So the argument goes like this, and this is what a pro-choicer will do to argue for abortion. Okay, so let's say you go to this party, and this is, by the way, an extremely popular argument, by the way, so if you're engaging in this, you will hear this brought up. If you go to this party, right, you go to this party, and at this party, you maybe fall asleep, or somebody slips something in your drink, or whatever, and you wake up, and suddenly you have a violinist attached to your body, and you're in a hospital. Why it's a violinist, I don't know. It literally has nothing to do, but they call it the violinist argument. Why it's a violinist, I don't know. It bothers me. If somebody can find out why, let me know. But you wake up with this violinist attached to you, and the doctor tells you, hey, you know, that violinist is depending on your body right now to live. If you pull, and then now this violinist is in a coma, they're not sentient in any way, then the question they say is, do you have a moral obligation then to give up your bodily autonomy so this violinist can use it to survive? Or can you ask for the surgery to be removed from the violinist, and the violinist might die, but you still have the right to your bodily autonomy? And they'll kind of bring this up, and you go, and I don't know if you've already had like 3 or 4 different things pop in your head that seems like it makes the argument wrong. But let me just go ahead and explain some of the obvious. Did I miss anything in the argument presentation there, Micah? Okay. So, 1. What if you knew that people who showed up at this party regularly walked out with a violinist attached to them? And then when you show up, you're like, oh my goodness, there's a violinist attached to me. It happened to me too. Let's say it was a very common known thing. In fact, that's almost like how reproduction even happens, right? The other thing is let's say the violinist only needed to hang out with you and use your body for, say, 9 months. A very predictable period of time. Well, then would you not be obligated morally to sacrifice maybe 9 months of your life inconveniently so he can live? Right? You should. If you're not willing to do that, then I really question your sanity. Right? Like, wait, okay, so this is really inconvenient. I really hate this. I don't know how I'm going to keep my job. I don't know how I'm going to do these things with this violinist attached to me. But at the same time, you're telling me in 9 months he's going to wake up and he'll live. Yes. Okay, I don't know how I'm going to make it work, but I'm not going to sit there and kill this guy. Right? So, again, the argument doesn't hold. So, and of course, again, a wise violinist, I don't know.
Yeah, it's
don't know.
very random.
It is. It's typical like philosophy things. Like there's also, when we get to the problem of evil, which we're going to start that series on the 25th of September, how to deal with the problem of evil and suffering in the world from a Christian. There's going to be some weird examples too that they call the Bambi argument. There's a lot in the philosophy world. There's just people come up with weird stuff. So anyway, all right. Then they'll be like, whoop. Well, this woman has a suffering. The man should be responsible too.
Amen.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. I think it's wrong, and this is where you can also point out, but think about it. The child support system, the way our entire system has been built on, is to prevent men from actually taking responsibility and being able to just abandon and leave their children. They can have all the play with none of the responsibilities. Point that out and go, that is wrong. I'm a Christian. Do you know how big we are on men leading? It's a really big deal to us. And in fact, you'll notice that in marriages they get married at younger ages, I don't know if you know this, Christian marriages that are married in younger ages last longer, they're happier, and actually, statistically speaking, the women actually report that they have better sex. Fun fact for you. Apparently, when you're a Christian married person, things go pretty well for you and your kids, and your children have less likelihood of crime activity and things like that. But single motherhood, you go over there, increased poverty, crime, addiction, depression, things like that. So this is where you reemphasize, now can you see why the Christian ethic isn't bad? Men should take responsibility. I think it's garbage the way Tinder and pornography, all these things have absolutely destroyed men. Because this isn't even like a men-women class, like the psychology of men and women, but it's one of my pet topics. Men and women are different sexually, period. They are, psychologically, they operate differently. Men are oftentimes considered what we would call the sexual aggressor. That doesn't necessarily mean bad things, right? It doesn't mean he's like, they're all rapists, but the one who's like, she's cute, I want to talk to her. Holy crap, how do I talk to her? I want to talk to her. And girls are, and I know many girls is like, well, if he wants to talk to me, he needs to come talk to me. Like, that shows initiative, and I like that, right? Or if you're like me, you pursue your wife hardcore for a while, and she still just goes, he's such a nice friend. But no woman! But I think Pastor Mark Gungor put it perfectly. Women, at their basis desire usually companionship, generally speaking. Men, their base desire is initially sexual. Sorry, ladies. It's just like, she's beautiful, I like her, and it's very much attraction based. And then as he gets to know her, he likes the companionship, and for her, as she gets to know him, then she's more, sexually open. Did you notice how it's a circle? It's a wonderful, beautiful cycle. Anyway, there's a lot of psychology about that. I could talk about that another time when we talk about maybe we should talk about complementarianism sometime in this class. That would be fun.
There you go.
That would be a good one because it shows how God has that design. But think about it. If your base instinct is sexual desire initially, and now you have an entire world that has Tinder, pornography, and all this stuff, well, I got my fix. And we're actually seeing a decrease in men actually even having sex in college, which I know is like, well, that's kind of good, but it's actually because of pornography, which is not good. And we are seeing more and more men just not showing interest in women. In fact, there's actually marriages that have fallen apart because the man is so addicted to pornography, he can't even perform with his wife. But anyway, so when we say that men have responsibility, I agree with you. This is good though. This is a good thing, and if this comes up in the conversation, this shows you're objective, because it means I'm not just trying to fight you. I'm agreeing with you. I'm being principled. We have common ground. Say, common ground is powerful in these conversations. So you just say we agree. Just make sure that categories are not creating our false equivalencies, right? So good ones, like here's some good categories. Make a baby with someone you're responsible to support. Who is responsible enough to support it, right? If you're gonna make a baby, do it with someone who's responsible, right? Men have equal say in how a child is raised and cared for, because there's this weird double standard there in today's society. Well, I'm the woman, it's my choice, you have nothing to say here, as if you are a co-creator in that. Also, stop hookup culture. It's toxic, right? Stop hookup culture. Here's some bad categories that people try to do. Well, okay, if you're going to do that, then we should force vasectomies on men. Well, no one is forcing you to get pregnant, right? I mean, outside of like rape and incest, right? Those areas. And also, another bad one is a woman can abandon her child. So even if not, the question isn't, is it wrong for a man to abandon his family? We agree. That is bad. However, it is also wrong to kill the child. If this is a person, then is it wrong to kill it? If men have responsibility too, why don't they get a choice in this? Right? You want them to have responsibility? Cool. Then you better give them an equal share of the choices. Okay? And again, the Christian ethic deals with this. So it's amazing we can use this conversation to actually have witnessing opportunities too. Fun fact for you. Done it many times. So
on that point about the male's responsibility, the number of vasectomies, I think it was in the state of New York because of some of the things, was way up. Guys are just with all the Roe v. Wade overturned. I saw a report that said the number of vasectomies have gone way up because guys are saying, "Hey, I recognize I'm part of this. I'll just get a vasectomy. Then I can have sex whenever I want. I won't have to worry about getting anybody pregnant."
Right.
So single men getting vasectomies.
It also goes to show the fact that again the culture does know. Right.
Oh, yeah.
They know exactly what they're doing. So a lot of these, I'm not sure if you've picked up on this, I've mentioned this many times, a lot of these are like smoke screens to deal with the actual issue, which is it a life, is it a life, is it a life, is it a life? That's all we're trying to argue for, is it a life? All these other things are whatever, is it a life? That's what we're trying to get to. So again, we'll hear, well, it's the woman's body. Again, we kind of dealt with this a little bit earlier, but I've heard it's all the woman's body. Well, then the obvious thing is to ask is, does a woman sometimes after sex become male? Because sometimes a pregnancy would be a man, right? A boy in her. So if she's pregnant with a boy, how can it all be her body? That doesn't make sense, right? Does she have 20 fingers, 2 hearts, 2 brains, 4 lungs? And then 9 months later not? Like, how's that all her body? And does she have 2 different blood types, DNA sets? Scientifically, now I'm on the side of science. Remember, me, Bible thumper, anti-science guy. Me, anti-science apparently is actually pushing science on you to say that doesn't work. Okay, so I think that's always a good way to go. So even pro-choice people, when speaking about miscarriages, don't use this language, oddly enough. So if my wife and I had 2 miscarriages, and if whatever pro-choice person finds out that are you okay? How are you? Suddenly, it becomes empathy. But when it's like, oh, I didn't want the child, like, good for you, champion that. You're like, is it something to be celebrated or mourned, or is it something to be dismissed? And in fact, how many of you guys have watched the show Chernobyl on HBO? Okay, it is fantastic, although it is a bit graphic, so only watch it as adults because there is nudity in it. Just warning you all. But it's actually really good because it actually really exemplifies that. But there's a part. So HBO, how many guys would say that they're on the conservative side of things? You'd say so. They tend to be the HBO tends to be, not so much, right? Like they're all the same. They're nudity, same-sex stuff all the time. Very liberal. They produce a show. And one of the things is that this man who was working on the Chernobyl site, he's poisoned by radiation, his skin is melting, he's going through all this stuff. This woman just wants to see her husband. She doesn't realize what's going on. She sneaks into this, because she was into this facility, goes through all these hoops to get to him because she's pregnant. She wants to tell him about their wonderful child they're going to have. And she sits down next to him, and she grabs his hand, and she puts it on her womb, and she's like, you're going to be a daddy. and of course it's playing like this eerie music because it's like radiation just transferred. Oh my goodness! And what ends up happening is actually the radiation transferred to the baby. Baby died, mother lived, and it was horrible. And they're like, this is terrible. And it's like a very tragic moment in the show. But I had this moment where I was like, that's funny, because I bet you every single person at HBO would say that that's a clump of cells if somebody wanted to abort it. But yet, right here, they just made a pro-life case, right? So it is amazing if you have your like God goggles on, if we can use that term. I stole that from Ben. But you have your God goggles on. You actually can start seeing some of this in the culture, and it's funny because it's almost like God's truth is not easily overlooked. So it is true. It's basically saying it's all the woman's body. It truly is just the argument that if it's wanted, it's a life, and if it's not, it's just a tumor. Which is the exact logic as slave owners or Nazi Germany. If we want it, it's a person. If not, it's not. Right? That's what this is. That's what that argument is. So make sure you just, again, pull that rug out from underneath it, get them to... And it's good for you sometimes to pull out the mirror and just show it to them. That's what you're doing. And that can be a very convicting moment because some people don't realize it. They repeat. Most people don't research and think. Most people repeat talking points and what is popular amongst people because they figure somebody trustworthy down the line made the decision, right? So again, coming from that perspective. Another one is you're forcing women to give birth. Many of you hear that, I'm sure. You're forcing women to give birth. So the way you should respond to this, the only case you could make here that anyone is forcing women to give birth is in rape and incest. Okay? Less than 2% of abortions, very small pregnancy rates. Okay? So, with that out of the way, if you freely choose to engage in an activity that can create a human life, you aren't being forced to have a baby. You are just being held by nature and law to the consequence of your actions. Okay? I'm not forcing you to give birth. You freely engage in an activity that would put you on the course to give birth. Okay? We live in a time where people just want to keep taking responsibility away from people. Like, you're responsible. I mean, student loan debt recently was like, oh, you just made decisions? No, it's fine. We're recession and all sorts of other economic problems. Don't worry about it. We got your bill. Like, think about it. Like, taking your responsibility, the choices you made, ripping it out and going, no, you don't have to be responsible for your consequences. That's what this is. That's essentially what this is. It's a smoke screen. So it's not wrong to force someone, and this is the other thing to bring up, it's not wrong to force someone not to kill. That's what you would actually call a moral good, right? If I was in a back alley somewhere and you saw me with a knife chasing Micah because he finally said one more thing in the middle of church service and I was done with it.
That's fun, well.
So I'm chasing him, and then Dominic jumps down from a rooftop dressed as Batman and kicks my butt and stops me from killing him. You would go, Dominic, you're the man. You're the best Guatemalan Batman I've ever seen. Right? But it's this whole idea of we are, of course, yes, because the other choice is to kill. That's morally bad, right?
Yeah, well.
Look, listen, Hobbit. And again, you can still give it up for adoption. You might get the response also, you'll get this, that birth control isn't 100% effective. So here's the other thing. If you can't afford to have a kid or are too busy or don't have good insurance, then you simply should not be doing the thing that would cause you to be in that situation. Take personal responsibility. No one gets to kill someone just because someone was irresponsible or medication didn't work. Okay? So that's just not the way it works. If you abort the baby, you are still forced to give birth, by the way. You are just deciding to give birth to a dead baby. Yeah. People don't seem to think about that. It's like you're still forced to give birth. It's just what are you going to, especially depending on what term, right? And of course, at this point, they might pivot and say it causes lasting effects on the mother, like, might change your body, might do this, might do that. And sure, but they're already pregnant, right? They already have some of those things going on now. The train has already left the station, you could say, and abortion also can have lasting effects, and abortion sure does have lasting effects on the baby. That's permanent, right? And on the mother, it is also because most women, again, traumatized afterwards, thinking that they made a good decision. Afterwards, they're going, that was not a good decision. That was horrible. What have I done? And then there's a guilt complex. So, and then finally, we're nearing the end here. So I'm just going to deal with rape and incest, and then we'll finish this. We'll finish at a later date. I was like thinking, like, well, might not get to everything as I would like, but sometimes I get ahead of myself. So that's why this is why I don't put a schedule out, because I know how I am. So these are, so rape and incest, first off, recognize it is a tragic situation, okay? No one likes to talk to a person who's dismissive on that. If you're dismissive on rape and incest, okay, they're probably not going to be too keen to listen to you. One, though, emphasize it's rare. And it doesn't make it okay, but it's rare, okay? So we, again, small cases versus the large. And a 1996 study found 5% of pregnancies result from rape. 32% opted to keep the baby. 50% had an abortion, so half of rape and incest babies were aborted. And 5.9% gave the baby up for adoption. 11.8% miscarried. And they concluded 0.14% of abortions are actually from rape, and that was in 96. Nowadays, you're probably around 1%-ish. Okay. So don't make it worse by adding murder to it. I think that's where you have to bring this. Okay, great. It is horrible. Now let's talk about how much more horrible it is if that girl who was raped or by her uncle even now has to live the rest of her life thinking, I killed a baby. I may have killed a child. What have I done? You're just compounding her tragedy. And no matter what, it's tragic, right? But at least don't put that on her conscience. Does this logic also hold out at any age? Can we kill someone who is the product of rape? Right? I've known people who are the product of rape. And does that mean that they're less human? These are the questions that you need to be asking them, because what they're saying is that, well, because she didn't want it, she was raped, that we can dehumanize that child and get rid of it. Well, okay, well, at what age does it, again, what level of development is it not a person? Okay. Is one's worth or value based on the morality of their parents? Is a good question to ask. Is one's worth or value based on the morality of their parents? And again, rape is similar to abortion. These are things to bring up. Forcibly carried out against a person's will. Outrageously violates the bodily autonomy of another. They have not consented to, or unable to, or not old enough to consent. Sometimes they're committed by people who should love you. It's irreversible, it's evil and immoral, it's unbiblical, it results in permanent damage or injury, it inflicts pain and suffering, creates a power imbalance, and it has no necessity, right? If someone rapes someone, put them on death row, not the child. That's what I would say. Like, all right, so someone rapes somebody, how about we put them on death row, not the child? Why would we kill the child? You know? And in fact, honestly, if we increased, I think, some of the punishment for sexual crimes, you might see a decrease in some of that, right? Because it's like, is it really worth it? Is what some people might ask. Because believe it or not, laws do deter people from doing things, and especially if the consequences are high enough, right? So that is up to number 11 out of these, by the way, because the next one would be pregnancy kills women. So this is kind of why I wanted to just do this. I wanted to run a gamut and just start going through. Let's just go through them at the end. Just give you an idea of ways to counter these. That's why I'm recording them too, because I don't expect you guys to remember all of them. The audio will be there, it'll be posted on the website. You can find it, so that way you're not like, oh man, I wish I had that information. Well, you do. Okay. With that being said, we'll close this out, and we will continue this as we go, and then we might have to push back the problem of evil one more week. But, I mean, most people who come to this class just come to this class anyway, so.
I don't care what we discuss.
Yeah. So, all right, has this been helpful?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good?
Yes.
Helpful discussion? Can you see where the issues really lie and how?
Is there a certain, should you mention certain things first, or doesn't it matter which?
I think it just depends on the argument that they go for.
Yeah.
If they go for a counter argument, you go for that, and always keep pushing personhood. That's what I try to do the entire time. Personhood, personhood, personhood. You'll notice someone like Ben Shapiro, whether people let you like the Hebrew Hammer or you don't.
I like them.
Yeah, I have a subscription though. I got the Leftist Tears Tumblr. It's a problem. Anyway, you'll notice he never, ever, ever does not call it a baby or a child or a person. He keeps it at that level of discussion, and that's what people are like, man, he's so good at it. I'm like, you'll notice it's because he doesn't adopt their language, right? And he keeps the main thing the main thing. So, all right, cool. We'll continue through this. We only have about 10 more left, and then, like I said, the series after this will be dealing with the problem of evil and suffering, and how can a good God exist with all the evil and suffering in the world. I was asked that actually recently by my sister-in-law, one of my sister-in-laws who's really struggling with her faith, and has abandoned or is close to abandoning Christianity. And right before I left Washington, she sits me down and goes, I have a question for you. She only had like 30 minutes and asks me that loaded question. I'm like, I'm going to do my very best in 30 minutes to answer that. But I think it is something that Christians need to be good at responding to. So we're going to take a few weeks to address that. I have it planned to be about 7 parts. That's my plan.
This one going to be 3 weeks?
Thanks, Sam. But this one I already had the outline made. So this one was funny because I was like, oh, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And as I went, I was like, oh, I should probably cover that. Too. So anyway, but I think it's a good thing for us to cover as a church. So
I think one of the things you say is you present the argument, and I'm sitting here and I'm going, oh man, how would I respond to that? And then you say them things and like, oh, that's good. But the proverb that says every argument sounds convincing until you hear the other side. And the John Locke paraphrase. But when you realize there are answers, it really does give you a lot more confidence in approaching people.
Right. No, it really does, and that's why that proverb is really good.
Yeah.
It's one of those things it's one of those proverbs I try to always, because there's times I'll hear an argument against God or against the resurrection or against the Gospels, and I'm like, whew.
How would I answer that?
Whew, that's a hard one. I don't know. Like I better go look that up to see if we have a good response to that.
Yeah.
But as a Christian, you shouldn't be afraid of that, because if it's true, it's true, and truth doesn't stop being true. Just means you have to find a way to present said truth.
Yeah.
That's why the Christian life's a journey, guys. You're going to be growing in knowledge and wisdom. At least you should be. So, all right, cool. With that being said, thank you guys for being in the class. I'm going to stop the recording.